As your typical storm season progresses, the area of greatest North American tornadic activity shifts considerably northwest, from Alabama and Mississippi in March and April to the southern plains and panhandles in early May, and eventually to the high plains of Canada by the 4th of July. But while the risk of tornadoes decreases across the Midwest, the risk of general severe weather actually increases in the form of damaging wind events like squall lines and derechos, flooding from multicellular thunderstorms that form and rain themselves out on a summer afternoon, and damaging hail caused by incredibly steep lapse rates. Sometimes, late in the season, the ingredients do come together for a significant tornado outbreak east of the Mississippi. June 8th and 9th, 1953, catastrophic tornado outbreak destroying Flint, Michigan, Cleveland, Ohio, and Worcester, Massachusetts. May 31st, 1985, the furthest east F5 tornado in Niles, Ohio, and many smaller towns in northwestern PA destroyed. But what about this cluster here? Several violent tornadoes occurring north of the Ohio River Valley, the same area affected by the worst tornado outbreak of all time. This is the Ohio Valley tornado outbreak of June 1990. 66 tornadoes produced in 24 hours, including 7 F4s, tore through southern Illinois and Indiana, destroying several towns, killing 9 and injuring 253. Despite setting an Indiana state record for the most tornadoes in a single day, the outbreak is often forgotten on a larger scale, overshadowed by the Hesston F5 twins of March 13th and the Plainfield Disaster on August 28th. Today we'll look at the anomalous meteorological setup that produced these late-season storms, track their formation and progression through the Ohio River Valley, analyze the severe damage to small towns that have never looked the same, and marvel at some of the best footage of that tornado outbreak that, if you're a weather nerd, you've probably seen before. You just didn't know the full context. The hardest part about making these videos is keeping track of every source I find on the internet. I've wasted hours of my time losing websites in plain sight, hidden somewhere within 50 open browser tabs. Thankfully, Opera One R2 has completely changed the game for my production workflow. The tab traces feature shows me which tabs I've visited most recently thanks to this subtle underline, allowing me to find them easily when going back and forth between websites. The darker the underline, the more recently visited. With the tab island feature, tabs are grouped automatically based on context. Here I've grouped all my daily weather maps and newspaper clippings. You can also make your own islands. Just drag one tab over the other and a group is created. They can be expanded and collapsed anytime, so you can have a much cleaner workspace. Opera also offers a split screen feature, allowing me to keep both my notes and source material side by side. Just drag a tab down to the center of the screen and the screen is split. I love that Opera also has a player with 6 music streaming services built into the browser, meaning I don't have to have Spotify or SoundCloud open in a separate tab. I can even detach the player and move it to wherever I want on my screen, even outside my browser. Customization is king with Opera. I can change theme combinations, animations, sounds, color, and more to create the perfect work environment. I chose Midsummer and I can change it to my heart's content. You just drag this control and it changes according to your preferences. Opera also offers Aria, its built-in AI tool, which can answer any questions without switching tabs or losing my spot on the page thanks to the command line. Aria can even recognize images that I upload, like this image of a supercell thunderstorm, or generate an image for me from a single prompt, like this killer severe weather background. Opera One R2 is truly the flagship browser that feels like it was made for creators like me. If you want to maximize your productivity, go to the link in the description below to download Opera. Thank you, Opera, for partnering with Weatherbox Studios. The super outbreak of 74 was not the last time prior to 1990 that tornado tragedy struck the Ohio River Valley. In January of 1989, a rogue F4 tore through Allendale, Illinois along the Wabash River just before sunset, obliterating the town of 600 residents. Temperatures soared into the upper 60s as the cold front approached, and the southerly winds provided plenty of moisture and low-level shear for the lone supercell. Meteorologist Jeff Lyons was live on television warning of the tornadic thunderstorm as it moved through the Allendale area. Half the town was completely destroyed, including the Allendale Community School. Miraculously, everyone survived. The rest of the year was relatively quiet in terms of violent tornado events, but an F4 did strike Huntsville, Alabama in November. The winter months month started off alarmingly cold and ended pleasantly warm. December saw an unusually deep trough settling over the eastern United States, causing a record Arctic blast and snow to hit the Gulf and southeastern United States in time for Christmas. But that January ended up being one of the warmest on record. As the El Niño Southern Oscillation transitioned into a neutral phase, the spring tornado season became very active. On March 13th, an unusually strong ridge of warm air surged far north over the Central Plains and met a strong trough pushing eastward through Kansas. The high shear, high cape environment produced several damaging tornadoes, including the infamous Hesston and F5 twins. In May, the National Severe Storms Forecasting Center issued 4 high risks for severe weather. On May 9th for Illinois, a storm system resulting in 4 tornadoes. May 15th for OKC to Louisville, a line of storms resulting in 17 tornadoes. May 20th for Oklahoma, which resulted in 10 tornadoes. And May 29th for the Texas Panhandle, where 9 tornadoes occurred along with severe damaging winds. Notably, an F3 ripped through Stillwater, Oklahoma late in the evening on the 15th, lifting roofs off of entire streets. One 4-year-old died when a portion of a roof was thrown into the truck in which he was riding. 17 others were injured. Likewise, on the 20th, a tornado hit several mobile home parks on the outskirts of Rogersville, Missouri. Flash flooding also occurred from heavy rains in Hot Springs. All 4 of the events were placed under a high risk by the National Severe Storms Forecasting Center at least a few hours before severe weather occurred. The setup for all these events was your typical severe weather setup for the central United States in the spring. Southerly surface winds bringing in moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Long wave troughs in the jet stream digging southeastward over the central United States. Cold air at the surface pushing into the northern United States from Canada. A surface low forms, and within that warm sector, severe weather occurs. None of the 4 May tornado events resulted in very clean or discrete convection. Flash flooding and damaging winds posed more of a threat than violent tornadoes. But in the first week of June, the upcoming severe weather setup looked pretty promising. On Friday, May 31st, an area of high pressure and colder air was centered around the Great Lakes, which would move east off the coast in the next 24 hours. High temperatures would soar into the 90s in Texas, and dew points reached 70 in Kansas and Missouri. From the west, a long wave trough pushed eastward over the Pacific Northwest, approaching the eastern United States. Embedded within the jet stream, a shortwave trough was approaching the Texas Panhandle and would be directly overhead by the evening of June 1st. A surface low formed near Cheyenne, Wyoming, and began pushing northeast. The winds aloft weren't insanely strong, only between 60 and 70 knots. The warm sector for this young cyclone was also huge, extending from Nebraska to the Mexican border. But with high surface dew points and moderate wind shear, the National Severe Storms Forecasting Center issued a moderate risk for severe weather centered over the southern plains from Big Bend National Park through Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Back then, there were only 3 levels to the Forecast Center's severe weather outlooks: slight, moderate, and high. So what would be considered moderate risk back then is what we would equate to enhanced risk today, or a level 3 out of 5. As the day progressed, low-level, warm, moist air moved into southwestern Texas at 40 miles per hour, pushing the dew points well into the 60s. At 700 millibars, an area of dry air was racing eastward from Chihuahua, Mexico. There was plenty of potential energy in the atmosphere. If this surface moisture was then forced up into the dry air, thunderstorms would explode into high precipitation monsters. While the wind speed shear wasn't overly impressive, with winds at just 30 knots at 500 millibars, the directional shear was intense. The wind veered at nearly 90 degrees between the surface and 3 kilometers above the ground. Storm updrafts would be spinning like a top. By 1:30 Central, discrete supercells began firing along the dry line in southwestern Texas. Several high precipitation storms grew and meandered southeastward through the desert, and at 4:20 p.m. a tornado touched down 9 miles south of McCarney, Texas. Within 5 minutes, the tornado ballooned in size and strength, moving empty oil tanks, scouring vegetation, lifting asphalt from a country road, and pulverizing several well-constructed homes. The intensity shocked the damage survey team, and eyewitness accounts depicted a black multiple vortex tornado that eventually became wrapped in rain. It's one of the few outlying violent tornadoes from this era that have zero photographic evidence. The storms in Texas formed a mesoscale convective complex, or a large cluster of convection, and slowly weakened as they moved eastward throughout the night. As the low-pressure system moved northeastward in the darkness, it deepened rapidly. The trough of low pressure aloft pushed eastward through the central Great Plains, and although not particularly deep, winds within the jet stream wrapped tightly around the low, creating a jet streak. Most importantly, the jet streak was small in size and it had a large exit region. This area is where the fast-moving winds spread out and slow down, and when a fluid, which is air, leaves an area where it is moving very fast in a tight corridor, like a high-pressure hose, that exit region where it spreads out and slows down inherently has a much lower pressure. This lower pressure aloft allows air at the surface to rise. Sandwiched in between the surface moisture and the colder air aloft was the elevated mix layer. This is a layer of warm, dry air that originates over northern Mexico and Arizona that gets advected or moved northeast over the central plains. In rarer situations, this EML can get advected all the way to New England, which is how many historic northeastern violent tornadoes have occurred. Now, many times when the EML gets advected over the central plains, the major tornado outbreak occurs, and then the following day, the storm complexes that form linger throughout the morning hours, the atmosphere begins to stabilize, the storm mode gets messy, and a lot of those prime ingredients are gone. But that is not the case here. Overnight on June 1st, the winds between 700 and 400 millibars around the trough strengthened, pushing this EML plume northeastward. Had this happened 24 hours earlier, June 1st would have been a much more significant tornado outbreak in Oklahoma and Texas. The strong EML over the Ohio River Valley would likely result in tornadoes that look like those in the high plains, a relatively high storm base within low precipitation supercells, creating picturesque tornadoes. Now, in terms of June 2nd, a familiar weather event with a similar setup is April 3rd, 1974. Notice how at the 500 millibar level, the lows aloft are in relatively the same position on the morning of day 1. A couple key differences exist. The low for April 3rd is much deeper, with the center at a height of 5390 meters compared to June 2nd, which was higher at 5580. And yes, if you've never looked at a 500 millibar map, these numbers stand for the height in meters. Typically, the lower the pressure surface, the more intense the weather system. It's kind of like a trampoline. The harder you push down on the center, the closer it is to the ground, and the more energy is released when you let go. Now, granted, the super outbreak of 74 happened 2 months before June, so the central pressure of our June 2nd system would not be the same as the super outbreak, regardless of their comparative strength. Another key difference is the size and intensity of the jet streak wrapping around each low. Winds aloft were moving at 120 knots on April 3rd compared to just 70 knots on June 2nd. Consequently, the exit region was also smaller. Tornadic conditions would be much more localized on June 2nd. In the morning hours, moisture surged northward from the Gulf of Mexico ahead of the approaching cold front. Dew point temperatures were above 60 degrees at 6 a.m. in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. This southeasterly wind was turning southwesterly aloft, creating an area of strong wind shear from Wisconsin through northern Kentucky. The National Severe Storms Forecast Center issued a high risk for Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana, citing the likelihood of severe thunderstorms producing damaging tornadoes throughout the afternoon and evening. In the morning hours of June 2nd, the convective line from the previous day weakened in Oklahoma and Arkansas, and thunderstorms began popping up within the warm sector in Iowa. Broken cloud cover in Illinois and Indiana allowed the ground to warm considerably, making the atmosphere extremely unstable. At 9 a.m. Central, the Storm Forecast Center expanded the high risk to include an extra 60 miles of northern Michigan and Wisconsin as surface moisture surged further north. A PDS tornado watch was issued along the northern Mississippi River at 11:21 a.m., and another tornado watch issued an hour later for central Arkansas. Isolated supercells were beginning to pop up in central Iowa and Missouri, producing several short-lived weaker tornadoes. At around 2 p.m. Central, this second cluster of storms in central Illinois and initiated, and these storms, along with any that would form further south, were in prime atmospheric real estate. A PDS tornado watch was then issued for all of Illinois at 2:54 Central. Now, typically with these more eastern tornado outbreaks, because the cold front is so sloped to the southwest, you'll get storm initiation to the north first, and then the storms will fill in along that line to the southwest as the cold front progresses. This is exactly what happened here. These northern storms in central Illinois were producing weaker, short-lived tornadoes, but the several storms that would develop to the south would have the best chance at producing long-track violent tornadoes. As the central Illinois storms raced towards Indiana, one of them dropped a small cone tornado, which hit the town of Findlay hard, damaging 70 homes. Joe Hibbert was in his boat on Lake Shelbyville, filming the tornado on his camcorder moments after it hit the north side of town. Thankfully, it was very narrow with relatively weak winds compared to the twisters that would develop later in the day. As the line of storms began to fill and mature, a second tornado within the central cluster of storms touched down, another thin dark cone, and snaked its way through rural extreme eastern Illinois. Jim Wieland, situated half a mile southeast, captured this twisting vortex on his camcorder as it churned through the farmland south of Chrisman. The rain-free storm base would be a common theme with all the supercells that would impact the Ohio River Valley. Several farm homes were destroyed near Horace, but again, no one was killed. At roughly the same time, a tornado warning for Montgomery County was issued for a supercell 30 miles to the northeast. Residents in Crawfordsville and Darlington got 30 minutes of lead time before the storm produced a thin tornado on the south side of Crawfordsville. It narrowly missed the town, however hit several homes in Smartsburg as well as a mobile home south of Darlington. As daytime heating peaked, the southern storms exploded and became tornadic very quickly. One of these storms that formed around 5 p.m. Central near Mount Vernon, Illinois, produced the first violent tornado of the day near Renard an hour later. Following US 50, it stayed mainly in rural farmland but destroyed a few homes to the southwest of Onley. Just before 6 p.m. Central, the northern supercell in this cluster began to get organized in structure. 10 minutes later, a large cone tornado reached the ground a few miles northwest of Newton, Illinois. People in the town of 3200 had a clear view to the southwest, and several called law enforcement to report the tornado. Footage taken by Norman Benefiel shows just how violent this tornado was, at least 5 subvortices dancing around the parent center, almost identical to the Hesston tornado that occurred 3 months prior. But this wasn't central Kansas, this was southern Illinois, and the tornado was heading for Newton. Upon approach, it destroyed several homes in the Imperial Acre subdivision on the west side of town. The twister barely missed the water tower as it churned through homes to the north of West Jordan Road. Larry Dorn on Orchard Street filmed the tornado with his VHS camera in his front yard. It passed by 3/4 of a mile to the northwest of his home. As the tornado moved northeast through the town, it lost its visible condensation funnel. Bruce Hill, a mile and a half to the south, captured the funnel as it exited the northeast corner of the town. The condensation funnel began to return as the tornado crossed the Embarrass River. The entire town was stunned at what just happened. 34 homes and 9 businesses on the northwest side of town were destroyed. The tornado appeared to reach peak intensity before entering the town, resulting in only 3 significant injuries. As the Newton tornado lifted, the same supercell that produced the Montgomery County F2 had cycled and tightened in rotation, preparing to spawn another twister. John Caldwell was standing on his porch east of Darlington, waiting patiently, looking to the southwest. He had heard that a tornado was on the way, but while the tornado he expected to see lifted back into a clouds, a second drill bit tornado touched down in a field half a mile away. He got out his camcorder and took this famous footage of the twister as it exploded a barn on County Road 1100 East.
He's not home yet. Watch it.
It's going to get that house right there.
Yes, it is.
Shit. There it is. There went the barn. Look at that. Oh my God. Look. Right there.
You're kidding. Look at this.
Picking it up now. Where's the other one, John?
I don't know.
Many people think this tornado footage was of the stronger F2 that went south of Crawfordsville, but in reality, it was this weaker F1 that was captured on film. The sun shined on the funnel as it crossed the county line, giving the tornado a bright white appearance. While John was capturing this film, 100 miles to the southwest in southern Illinois, an impressive supercell had just dropped a tornado on the border of Hamilton and Wayne counties. As it crossed I-64, Illinois police reported the tornado to the National Weather Service, which then issued a tornado warning for Wayne and Edwards counties. Davita Lesner was a 1.5 miles southwest of Ellery at her mother's house, watching the tornado approach from the southwest. With the tornado about 3 miles away, she picked up her VHS camcorder and captured one of the most iconic tornado home videos ever filmed.
Just keep it going, dude.
Yeah, it is.
You get it. Now's the time. It's gonna come right across here. It may take the old barn.
If it does, I hope so, Sam.
As it approached their property, the twister changed in appearance.
Isn't that funny looking?
I bet it's gonna miss the house here, but them little ones spawning off of it, you see there.
Uh-huh.
This little one spawning off of it is a horizontal vortex, and it's a really cool result of fluid dynamics. In a paper written by Mauricio Oliveira, Ming Xu, Brett Roberts, Louis Wicker, and Nusrat Yusuf, the entire life cycle of a tornado was modeled using the Advanced Regional Prediction System. You can see here what the model output looks like when looking at areas of vertical vorticity. You can see the parent condensation funnel and smaller vortices dancing around it like you would for a very strong tornado. When looking at horizontal vorticity, we can clearly see tubes of spinning air parallel to the ground. These are likely the result of the air rushing into the tornado interacting with the ground, producing friction and inducing a horizontal spin that stretches outward into a long tube. The largest horizontal vortices that formed during these simulations occurred east of the tornado and would wrap around to the south side, and what do you know it, that's exactly what we see here. This tube of spinning horizontal air likely extends a few hundred feet further southwest, but is not visible, just like how some condensation funnels on parent tornadoes are invisible. With the tornado now less than a mile away, you could hear the infamous freight train roar. Moving to the south side of the property, Davita captures the tornado passing by 1/2 mile behind the barn.
Okay. It's going by now.
It's not safe to come up.
You don't see it. Come on up now. Ready? Yeah. Come look right quick. Right back here. Go back over here.
The debris seen flying here is likely from Bethel United Methodist Church, which was flattened by the tornado. 5 miles down the road, it approached the next town, Albion, striking the south side of town. It exploded the Lubrifiner industrial plant on South 4th Street, leaving behind twisted steel beams protruding from a pile of rubble. To the east, Ray and Mary Messman were on a farm south of Browns when they saw the tornado passing to the north. They grabbed their camera and filmed the thin but violent cone pass a mile to the north, skirting the northwestern edge of town. It's likely at this exact moment that Norma Wood, living in the northwest corner of Browns, was sitting in her recliner when the tornado hit her home. She was lofted into the tornado, recliner and all, and deposited onto a pile of rubble when she sustained injuries that would eventually lead to her death. Moving into Wabash County, the strong twister struck the county seat of Mount Carmel at the confluence of the Wabash and White Rivers. Affecting the north side of town, it tore the roof off the Wabash Valley College dormitories, took out the northeastern side of Thomas Howell's new home he just bought on Market Street, and exposed the interior of James Baker's home like a dollhouse. While the lawn track tornado was churning east, a supercell directly to the east produced a strong stovepipe tornado to the west of Lagodi, Indiana. Luckily, we have two pieces of footage taken at the exact same time as the tornado approached town. The footage on the left was taken by George Erler on Byron Street, and the footage on the right was taken from Cooper Street near the center of town.
It's only about a mile away now.
Down good now,
I'm
guys.
gonna call you, and then I think on the phone today. It's big one now.
Come on, baby.
I know. Get in there. Get in there. Going north of the hill.
The tornado would miss the Erler home by about half a mile. Both show the tornado hitting several structures before weakening just northwest of Lagodi. The incredible motion within the base of the funnel was captured perfectly as the tornado began to rope out. Thankfully, no one was injured in Lagodi, but the danger from the storm was far from over. Soon after dissipating, the Lagodi storm produced a larger tornado in Lawrence County to the southwest of Bedford. A tornado warning was issued for the county 2 minutes before touchdown. Located about 5 miles southwest of town and moving quickly, residents had less than 10 minutes to seek shelter. Being the county seat, it homed 13,000 people, making it the largest town to be affected by this outbreak. The most tragic story of the day occurred in Bedford when Benjamin Ray and his parents were out shopping before the storm hit. Hearing the storm was on its way, they returned to their mobile home, and upon taking shelter, the tornado hit, pulling Benjamin out of his mother's arms. He did not make it out alive. Incredibly, when relatives searched the wreckage, they found the children's pet hamster alive and safe beneath plywood. The tornado leveled a dozen businesses, including the Red Rooster restaurant where 35 people were gathered. It destroyed 30 homes, including 2 trailer parks near the East Fork White River. Luckily, it missed the densely populated center of town. As the Albion supercell chewed through forest in the White River Valley, a second supercell formed on the rear flank of the storm, quickly maturing and showing strong rotation in its updraft. It lagged behind the Albion supercell, taking a path due eastward, veering to the right of the mean wind flow. At 6:50 p.m. Central, Jeff Lyons was broadcasting live from WFIE Evansville with a severe weather update. You can see the long track F4 now just to the north and west of Petersburg on the Evansville Doppler radar. 15 minutes later, this tornado would hit transmission lines coming from the Petersburg generating station coal power plant. This photo was taken by Bill Stedman along Route 61 at around the same time. While Petersburg was spared for now, the National Weather Service would issue a second tornado warning for this western supercell heading right for Petersburg. The town of 2,500 had just dealt with a natural disaster 2 weeks earlier when heavy rains caused the White River to flood, breaking a water main to the town. A temporary pipeline had to be built, running from the power plant through farmland up to the Petersburg water tower. Now, an F4 tornado was heading for the center of town. This video appears to be taken from West State Road 56, about 3/4 of a mile from the tornado. 10 minutes later, with the sun inching closer to the horizon, it began its trek through Petersburg. In a worst-case scenario, the tornado hit the Petersburg Healthcare Center head-on, a nursing home with 95 residents on Pike Avenue. Miraculously, the worst injuries here were lacerations from flying glass. 2 blocks to the east, Stacy and Clifford White were at their wedding reception at the Moose Lodge with 250 guests when the tornado blew across Pike Avenue. The entire wedding party hunkered down and made it out okay. Stacy herself was a nurse and was able to use a door as a stretcher to bring an injured elderly man inside to treat his injuries, all while in her wedding dress. Crossing Main Street, it began destroying the old homes near the center of town. 74-year-old Billy Manier died in his trailer on Sycamore Street. 1 block north, 2 elderly women in the apartments on Walnut died from injuries sustained due to partial collapse of the structure. 14 blocks of homes were rendered unrecognizable. Cars were tossed into homes. Bricks and wood splinters flying at over 150 miles an hour stripped trees of their limbs, peeled siding off of exterior walls, and shattered every window in their path. Exiting the residential area, the tornado hit Petersburg Elementary, destroying every classroom in the school. It was quickly deemed a total loss, and a new school would have to be built in its place. Petersburg was once again without water, and the temporary pipeline would have to be rebuilt. It was the hardest hit town on June 2nd, and the 6 deaths across Pike County were the highest total of the day. As the line of storms approached Ohio and Kentucky, another F4 hit rural Jackson County, affecting mainly forests. The Albion storms cycled and produced another F3 north of Crawfordsville. The supercells, being squeezed by the cold front, were beginning to form a solid line, which would disrupt the individual storms' updrafts and put an end to the violent tornado potential. The end of the outbreak was a couple hours away. At 11 p.m. Eastern, the northern storm in this line produced a tornado about 3 miles west of the Ohio border in Dearborn County. Steve Horstmeyer was live on TV warning Harrison residents of the storm before it hit. If anyone was paying attention to the weather that day, they would know that this storm was coming. Harrison was also in an interesting spot. 40% of the county's residents lived out of earshot of tornado sirens, mainly in the western part of the county. Minutes later, the tornado slammed into the town of Harrison before crossing Interstate 74. In the 8 blocks between State Street and Industrial Drive, 24 ranch-style homes were destroyed. Thankfully, like most of the other tornadoes that day, it was only a few hundred yards wide, meaning only a couple homes per street were a total loss. A dozen people were trapped in the wreckage of their homes. Several stores in the Tall Oaks shopping center were flattened. 11 airplanes at the Harrison airport were snapped in half. In Harrison County alone, 32 homes were swept clean of debris. But many of these homes were inadequately attached to their foundations, meaning that F3 or F4 winds could have caused the damage. 426 homes in total were damaged in Harrison County. 300 more homes were damaged in southern Fairfield before the tornado lifted just west of Mason. Emergency services tasked with rescuing trapped residents found it difficult to communicate exactly where they were. With the twister taking down mailboxes and street signs, addresses were difficult to pinpoint. Shockingly, no deaths resulted from this nighttime tornado. In recent years, the people of southwestern Ohio have taken warnings seriously, which is a big reason why, when another nighttime EF4 hit Dayton in 2019, the death toll was also minimal. As the cold front squeezed the individual storms into a linear convective system, 3 more strong tornadoes occurred north of Louisville, affecting overwhelmingly rural areas, destroying several farmsteads, but again, everyone made it out alive. A lot of lessons that were learned on April 3rd, 1974 were fully realized on June 2nd. Tornado warning lead times were above average for the year, most people took shelter appropriately, and communities banded together after the fact to help those in need. With that said, human reaction may not have been the biggest factor in the minimal death toll. The tornadoes on this day were tall and thin, most being under a few hundred yards wide. Due to the presence of a high plains elevated mix layer, you had these beautiful picturesque rain-free bases within these supercells, and the tornadoes were visible 10 miles away before sunset. If they were wider, they would have absolutely hit more mobile homes with families inside, which would have increased the death toll. No matter how prepared you are, luck will always play a part in the outcome of severe weather outbreaks. The 37 tornadoes that formed in Indiana broke the single-day state record of 31 tornadoes from April 3rd, 1974. That record still stands to this day. If you want to see even more content on this outbreak, check out Andrew Pritchard's fantastic video where he actually visits Davida Lesner's mother's house in Ellery, Indiana, and gets a tour of the area from a family member. I want to thank Carrie Hoffman for requesting this video over 2 years ago now. I also want to thank Mark Jensen for sending me a videotape of news footage from the Newton tornado. I had a lot of fun digitizing it, and it was super helpful. If you have any old weather videotapes you want digitized with professional video equipment for free, you can send them to my mailing address up here along with an email, and I will send them back to you within a couple weeks. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I just got back from Texas where I was filming on site for a video next month. Super excited about that one. Think you guys are gonna like it. I'll see you soon.